Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to another edition of the Shuwatch podcast. I'm your host, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and here with me for the guest of today's episode is a guest we've had quite a number of years ago, way back in 2015, when we were covering the Durantis issue 2 Kickstarter. And coming back onto the show, it is indie comic writer Scott Schmidt.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's been going very well. It's very great to have you back again, man. I know
great to be here.
We were talking a little bit off recording how a lot has changed, I guess like for you and I in like the 4 years since we had that initial like interview / podcast way back when. And want to know, how have you been doing, man, recently?
I've been doing well. It just kind of, taking more and more steps towards adulthood. Got married and right now looking for a house. So, doing all this grown-up stuff. But at the same time, being non-grown up by making comics and trying to take as much time as I can to make new series and keep making new stories. So that's kind of what I've been up to.
That's fantastic to hear, man. It's like you have like 1 foot still in your childhood and 1 foot into adulthood.
Exactly. Yep.
It's like the perfect balance, or something. Whatever Thanos said in Infinity War. See, how the knife stands on my finger. It stands perfectly balanced. And so I know in the time between like 2015 and now, the Kaiju Noir channel has grown considerably over the last couple of years. So there's a good chance that a good portion of my subscribers might not have been around during 2015. So for people who are perhaps listening in and are exposed to the greatness of Scott Schmidt for the very first time, would you like to give them the rundown as to who you are?
Yeah, for sure. So I probably started doing comics around 8 years ago. Started off small, doing little short stories, and I was always really big into Westerns, so that's kind of what I started with. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I kind of started to explore all the different things you could do with comics. And between now and then, I've done a couple different series. One of my first was actually a giant monster series with artist Tyler Sowell's Durantis, which later became Durantis the Lost Serpent. Mm-hmm. And so that was one that I've done. And then I am working still with him on another series called Hank Steiner Monster Detective, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a monster who's a detective. So that's actually being published by Source Point Press. Mm-hmm. So we're currently working on the 3rd issue. The first 2 are out.
Nice.
In addition to that, I also self-publish a Mountie versus Monsters comic book. It's actually gone through a rebranding here recently. It's called Northern Steel, and it's kind of one I've been working on in my off time for past couple of years. So there's 2 issues out, and I'm working on the next one right now. And then amidst all of that, I guess is my latest, possibly greatest series so far, which is called Final Street, and which is basically a retro beat 'em up comic book. And I've been working on that for about 2 years now. We've got 1 issue out, and it's Devil's Due is our publisher for that one. And then we are currently in the stages of making the next one. So that kind of brings you up to speed, sort of kind of what I do and what I've been up to. So
very good. So you got yourself a monster detective, giant monster book, Mountie versus Monster, and a beat 'em up arcade style comic book. So it's like you've got yourself like a very nice resume of work here at your disposal. And I'm very curious to know, what I've noticed like some comic book writers, they would usually like stick to one project and kind of see that continue forward. But I think you're probably one of the few people I've noticed where you kind of branch off and do like multiple projects that have like almost nothing to do with each other. How do you juggle all these different, or juggle or balance all these different topics throughout your 8-year career as a comic book writer?
My first instinct is to say poorly. But it kind of mostly has to do with, I don't know, maybe the type of creative person that I am, that like, not that I get bored with my own ideas, but like as much as I enjoy working on an idea and fleshing it out and working on a story, like any creative person doesn't find themselves creating one thing at once, like you just can't help but think about other things while you're thinking about what you're supposed to be thinking about. So
true. As a YouTuber, I can definitely agree to that.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're always thinking about what you're thinking about, but you're also always thinking about the next thing. So I just have a tendency to, if I just get kind of a crazy idea and I feel strong enough about it, it doesn't really matter kind of what I've got going on now. I don't feel the need to finish something before I start something new. So that's juggling. It's just kind of like just trying to make it work, but it is a thing where it sounds probably more romantic than it is, because really though it is hard to try to promote 2 different series or to work with 2 different sets of creative individuals to produce something, or to be able to split your funds in order to fund what you're working on. So it is hard. And I think that maybe if I was to go back and do some things differently, that might be one of them, is to maybe finish one storyline or arc before branching out to the next one. But I don't know.
And I guess like luckily in terms of creative teams, you have like Tyler working on both Hank Steiner and Durantis. I forgot, did he work on Northern Steel or its old title Steel Versus?
No, he did a few pinups for the series. So he was actually technically he was the first person to ever sketch Steel, so that's pretty cool. So but no, he hasn't worked on the book itself.
Okay, and as for Final Street, it's like a completely new team you're working with, right?
Yeah, it's people the artist Brian Atkins and the co-creator. I've previously worked with him and had been in contact with him through other smaller comics work, and we both lived in St. Louis at one time, so we were friends through that.
Okay.
And but no, everybody else I have not previously worked with involved with Final Street. So
okay, and so in terms of like the latest this latest project that you've been working on, how did the idea of Final Street come about, and how was it like you who approached Brian, or Brian who approached you, or was it like one of those situations where both of you came up with the idea together while like brainstorming at one night?
So I don't mean to sound like that I'm claiming it or anything, but like I originally thought of the idea.
Okay.
And it had come to me because I had, at some point in time, I had really gotten heavy into retro gaming. Like I have all of my old games. I've always, like bought old games when I could. So I've always loved retro gaming, but as I was getting to get into it more and actually playing them and stuff like that, I just realized that beat 'em ups were not only just my favorite series, but just like how big a role they played in my childhood, like how many distinct memories of games I have as a kid are from all beat 'em ups, like where I was when I was playing them, like how they made me feel, and like, just all kinds of stuff like that. So I was just thinking about all beat 'em ups and whatnot, and I just had this idea of, I wonder if that would work as a comic book. So a couple months later, Brian and we were at a comic shop signing together, and afterwards we went and got a bite to eat. And we've always know that we wanted to work together on some project, and we tried a few times and done a few short story works, but never really like clicked on anything like major. So I just decided to shoot him a few ideas, and Final Street was one of them. And I had basically the name and just the premise that it's a beat 'em up video or beat 'em up comic book. And like he was just like instantly like, yeah, that's the one I want to work on. So and funnily enough, we got really excited about it and decided to jump on a podcast and talk about it. And we literally had no art. We had no actual
story.
No, like nothing physical created. We were just talking about this idea on this podcast, and the next thing you know, they wanted a logo from it. So Brian basically created the logo after the podcast, and then next thing you know, we had our Instagram account going, and like from that moment of us sort of announcing it, we just have been going nonstop since then, trying to make it. So
right. And I noticed like the Final Street logo, both the name and the logo is sort of like a callback to stuff like Final Fight and Streets of Rage.
Absolutely. And like that's the core of the book. Is it's a love letter to those genres, to those games, and just the things that they all have in common. And we reference as many of the games as we can within the series. But at the same time, one of the things that we wanted to do is those games, like they literally have no story. It's every one of them is that someone gets kidnapped, and most often it's the girlfriend, and then you just have to go beat up people to get them back. So,
right.
So the idea was to try to maybe expand on that in some way. It's not a lot, but at least flesh it out more than that. So. Right.
Is there any chance that maybe at some point the Sully and Kumi would be going like time traveling, like Ninja Turtles in time?
Maybe by the fourth series, when it's no longer popular and it has to be reinvigorated, it'll make it time traveling.
Very true. Yeah. I mean, it's like time travel and body switching. Those are like some of like the more desperate ideas. It's like, fuck it, let's just send them to the Stone Age, have them be a caveman.
Whatever we have to do to get people talking about it again,
Yeah. And let's see. So it's like, I've noticed like through reading through the first issue of the comic, you definitely have this like really cool, very vivid world. It's very like multicolored, neon-filled urban environment, very similar to those arcade games and Genesis, SNES games. And I've noticed that you've definitely put a very huge like late 80s, early 90s flavor to everything. I'm assuming that was like an intention from the very get-go to have that like that pop culture, childhood pop culture feel to it.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, like those games, they come from like that certain time period, so they're all flavored with that style, they all have something about them that you can just instantly tell what decade they're from. And
totally.
So like we wanted to try to invoke that feeling, almost like that who was ever reading the comic was reading a comic that was made like during the same era as those games. So
totally. It's like as soon as I saw like the boyfriend, the main character's boyfriend, Franklin, I noticed he's sort of got this like Fresh Prince style fade hairstyle. I was like, oh my god, I haven't seen that in forever. I remember there was a time when I used to have that hairstyle. And so you mentioned before how each of these games used to have like no plot, and it's usually just save the girlfriend. So was the premise of having like two female leads, say rescuing what's the opposite of a damsel? Like the male version of a damsel. I guess a male damsel in distress, like the gender reverse roles. Was that premise like thought up early on or was that like more of like a last minute idea for a story?
It was a core component. It was pretty much It was pretty much the first thing, and I think that's because, in all honesty, I feel like just trying to do a beat 'em up where it's just like where it's just, you know, the same as it is in the games with you know, just your male strong characters. Like, I guess it's not advancing, or it's not doing anything special that those games didn't already do themselves, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, you know, I wanted to be able to do something that's a take on something familiar, but be able to add, you know, an updated modern version of what that might look like now to it.
So, like, you were trying to pay homage while also trying to make your story find its own identity.
Yeah, I think so. Like, if you went and you made those games, like if you made a new beat 'em up today, and it was these stereotypical characters, like I don't think it would be received as well, just because, you know, we don't live in that world anymore. Like, we're so much more socially conscious of different, you know, societal norms now, that I think it would more look like a regression if it was the way those games actually played out now.
Right. That is true, yeah. Especially, it's like in this day and age, the damsel in distress trope has sort of been like looked down upon, and I know it's like a lot of in like comics and movies and games, they're always trying to find some sort of like twist to update that trope, or at least very least, if you are gonna have a damsel in distress, at least have the damsel herself be like an interesting character.
Right.
Yeah, just like recently, I've just finished Daredevil season 3 on Netflix, and they do have the character of Karen Page, and you know, she's often, you know, early on seasons they would like have Daredevil rescue her on multiple occasions, and she would later on become like street smart and enough to try to contribute as much to the plot as Daredevil and even Foggy Nelson. So that's like, I know I've sort of noticed that as well. It's like, if she's going to be rescued, at least have her like learn from past mistakes. And yeah, it's very interesting here. It's like you're taking the plot of, say, like Double Dragon or so, and then just like switch things up and see how would a female character just act in this sort of situation.
Right.
I do find the characters of Sully and Kumi very charming, and I find it kind of interesting how it's like you have this character. I'm not sure if this was in your intention, but it's like, from what I see with Sully, she's trying to like balance her more like masculine and feminine traits at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying like a combination of beauty and bronze.
Right. Exactly.
And what actually was the inspiration behind the two protagonists of this story, of Sully Rhodes and Kumi Kogara?
So, I don't know. It's real strange. It's unexplainable for Sully that I knew that I wanted the main character to have a pink mohawk. I couldn't tell you why. I just wanted that to be, you know, this real eye-catching sort of, you know, because I knew that if she was going to run out into the streets after her boyfriend, she needed to have sort of a you know, flamboyant personality to sort of back that up, you know, that mind frame up. So
you want something that's like just as visually outrageous as her personality.
Right. And like the way that we've sort of approached it is you know, and that Kumi's the complete opposite way. And it has to do a little bit with the fact that there's sort of a mentor-mentee relationship.
Oh,
like
really?
There's a comment in the there's one or two comments in the first issue that say that she's training Sully, you know, and then she's sort of her, you know, mentor figure. And we really play with that as like, because Sully's the bull in the china shop. That's how she solves most problems.
Right.
But Kumi's the exact opposite. You know, because she's basically a ninja, and like that's where she came from. Because I love ninjas, I think, more than I love anything else, and I wanted to have a ninja beat 'em up character. So
of course, I mean, who doesn't like ninjas?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a kid of the 80s and the 90s, so ninjas were probably 50% of my entertainment diet in some way or another.
Right. And and what was it? I do like the idea where it's like, them being stark, kind of like opposites in personality, and I think that reflects very well in their character designs as well. You got Sully rocking these like very bright colors, whereas Kumi is mostly in a black attire with some nice white and red highlights.
Yeah.
What were some of your like? So when it came to these designs, you mentioned the pink mohawk was like, that was your idea. Were there any other like contributions you made in terms, or sort of inputs you made in terms of the overall style of the comic?
I mean, I will honestly say no. Like, Brian, he basically, I mean, he's an absolute joy to work with. He's like, in his excitement for this comic, I mean, you can tell just how good the character designs are, because aside from the pink mohawk, these two main characters, like, he just built from the ground up. And like, I remember as we were going through, he had a couple Pinterest page going on, and we were just like, he's like, hey, I found all these, these pins for Kumi and what I wanted to look like, and her zip up hood and all that. Like, he basically just like customized all these different like urban ninja style like things that he found online into this like cohesive design. So like, it's just like, it's amazing that he was able to do that, from the ground up and with very little input from me, which was that I wanted her to be a ninja. So,
like one like kickboxing brawler, the other's like a stealthy ninja.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just gave him those skeletons basically, and he filled them in, from head to toe. So
Right. And I've seen like through the Instagram and Facebook pages of Final Street that I've seen like other artists take on these two characters, and I think like you really nailed something here with these character designs, where it's like no matter what interpretation they are translated into, no matter what artistic envision they're translated into, you can still recognize them because they have like such a I wouldn't say iconic, maybe because, they're new characters, but I would say like they got like a very recognizable feel to them, regardless of whatever version you see of them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I say these are like very appealing character designs, and I would totally love to see like maybe like an actual like a maybe some later down the line like some game gets actually produced of these two characters. I would love to play as them.
Oh yeah, man, me too. Like, and we've talked about numerous times about getting some full on pixel animation done and get it done in GIF form, like just even if it's like their resting stance, while they're waiting to knock heads together. So
right.
It's definitely something we want to do, but we'll see if there's room in the budget.
I would definitely say like you really got something very special here, and I would love to see like Final Street take off and see these characters get translated maybe into like other forms of media, or just see them expand within the comic medium itself. I know. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that one slightly encouraging thing I think for Brian and I both is just that like video games can be done so easily, not easily, but that they're not the scale. You can produce a game and you can reach an audience with it with such a smaller scale than you used to be able to. Like, oh,
totally.
You've got games that are coming out on the Switch, every day that are made with 3-man teams.
Right.
So I think the feasibility of this becoming a game one day, like I think it's there, and I think that we might be able to get that done. So
yeah, totally. I think it's like it's now like a golden age for indie developers. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, sure, there are a lot of issues that like big AAA video game companies have gotten a lot of flack for, be it like microtransactions or like an over reliance on like day one patches and DLC and pre-order packages and loot boxes or loot crates. But
yeah.
I mean, just look at EA and all the shit they've got from what was it, Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Yeah.
But
all that stuff tanked that game.
Oh yeah. Oh god. But I feel like in terms of like the indie side of things, I feel like things have never been more accessible than they have been now. Well, with stuff like Steam, Epic Games, you got like the internet, which is just like a big wide market of free promotion right there. With people doing Let's Plays, stuff like Minecraft or what's that other one? That was the one game that everyone's playing right now that I still haven't yet to get into.
Either Fortnite or
PUBG, PUBG, Fortnite.
Right.
Oh, I'm sure you've heard of Five Nights at Freddys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like a small game made out of like a few like flash animations, and it became like this gigantic worldwide success.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's just like the possibilities are endless, and people are constantly making these throwback games that go back to older stuff genres, and I can totally see something like classic beat 'em up being a success. It just reminded me. I remember back in high school, I think it was Double Dragon Neon came out. Did you ever play that?
Yeah, the it wasn't like a remake. It was sort of its own game thing. I don't know. It was real wild.
Right, yeah. And like the villain was like essentially Skeletor as you're fighting for like a Big Trouble in Little China sort of setting.
Yeah.
And
it was awesome. I mean, honestly, it's probably the best Double Dragon game as far as gameplay is concerned.
I'm not sure what I haven't played too many I've only like really played Neon and like the original Double Dragon, but the NES version. But I even like playing the original one and the new one. It's like I do definitely love that definitely love that beat 'em up genre, and Double Dragon Neon was definitely like very sort of, how would you say, a very like condensed version of everything you like about the genre.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I would probably say it's like, let's see, in terms of like other like modern beat 'em ups, it's like, I can think of like Turtles in Time Reshelled Edition, which is like that remake version of that. I know a lot of people kind of didn't like it for whatever reason, but I enjoyed it as much as I did the original version.
Yeah, people were real hard on it. I didn't quite understand. I mean, it was okay. It wasn't like, I don't know what they were expecting, but
right. There was another recent beat 'em up game that got a little bit of flack. I think just because of its poor presentation. I think it was like what was it, like Streets of like, it was either a new Streets of Rage or a new Final Fight. And it was criticized for having like a very poor visual style, where instead of actually making pixelated art, they just took real 2D art and just kind of made it blurry.
Oh no.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is.
I wish I found out before doing this. Would you count King of the Monsters 2 as a beat 'em up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I think we may have talked about this like in our last interview, where we talked about like old retro monster games that we grew up with, and it's like I feel like the King of the Monsters needs to come back in some form.
Yeah, they totally should. They had some awesome monster designs on those games.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I mean, how can you go wrong with like a robot Kong, an atomic Ultraman looking dude, and obviously not Godzilla, not Zilla.
Right. The original too. The original one was just a one-on-one fighting game, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but it was kind of like have some cool ones.
Yeah. I think it also had some like wrestling elements as well, in terms of like pinning down a monster instead of actually like knocking down all of their health.
Right, you're right. That is how you were supposed to do it. You had to pin them.
Right. And
I
it's
feel like that started out as a wrestling game, and then they just decided to change it mid game to a monster game.
right. And then it's like, what do we do with it? Fuck it, beat him up.
Yeah.
And let's see. I remembered this. Going back to the Final Street comic. I recall at some point you on your social media accounts you mentioned that you were putting in some cameos of certain individuals into the comic itself.
Hmm. Yeah, we actually so our main area that we sort of do stuff for Final Street is on Instagram. We have an Instagram page just at Final Street, and that's where we'll show most of the artwork that is coming out. We'll show we'll do special trivia weeks, and we try to promote it and try to interact with people as much as we can. And one of the things that we did was a giveaway contest, and we gave away an appearance in the comic, and you actually got drawn into it, and then you got a line as well. So
is there a potential for more of those sort of like draw-in appearances for Final Street number 2?
For number 2, we really wanted to, but the biggest problem with this next one compared to the first one and what we were able to do with that is that most of the scenes feature the ninja, and they're generally all covered, so we couldn't really put someone's likeness in as a ninja.
Yeah.
But the good thing is the third issue, which is going to be heavily influenced by, funny that we were talking about wrestling and stuff. A certain game that has beat 'em up roots, but is actually a wrestling game. It's called Saturday Night Slam Masters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which actually has a tie to Final Fight as Hagar's in that game. So
yeah, cool.
there's a funny little rabbit hole that we went down with beat 'em ups and Final Fight to get to our basis for the third issue. And but what I'm trying to say is that in the third issue there'll be a lot of opportunities for crowd faces and people to interact. So hopefully we can once we get to issue 3, then we can start putting more people into the comics.
Okay. By the way, I noticed that there's this particular character in the first issue named Renegade or Renegade.
Renegade. Yep.
Renegade. Is he a particular reference to someone, or is he just like a character who's there for like this world's lore building?
So it's actually a direct reference to the game called Renegade. And
okay.
It's, for all intensive purposes, it's pretty much the first beat 'em up game.
That's why.
Kind of
there's that line, like so, they say he's the first of his kind. Yeah,
and Sully says, "Well, we owe him big time." You know, the idea that without that game, there wouldn't be any of the other beat 'em ups. So, we just wanted to pay a real thoughtful homage to that game, but also just kind of this idea to be able to populate Transit City in the Final Street universe with sort of our own versions of the more famous beat 'em up characters that inspired the whole thing. So.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Very nice.
And if you the scene where he's kicking the guy off the subway platform.
Right.
If you look up the NES cover for Renegade, it's basically a really image. Strong reference. Yeah.
Okay. Because like the whole situation, the whole like how do you call it? The whole composition just looks like something that's right in the middle of an NES or Super SNES like cover title card art, where it's just just a guy just kicking or punching someone in the face, and it's like right, yep. And like moving their fist or their kick, like their fist or their leg, like right into like the viewers' faces.
Right.
Nice. And just wondering how do you see like Or do you possibly see like some sort of like a connection between beat 'em up games and like traditional fighting games? Is there any sort of like a shared fan base between the two, or shared like a how do you call it? Do you see like fighting games and beat 'em up games, despite being like technically different genres, do you see them having any strong ties with one another?
I do. I see it mostly with Final Fight and Street Fighter, since there are those shared characters. Because later, I think in Alpha 3 is when they put Cody and Guy from Final Fight into Street Fighter, and as well as some other villains. So, like, there is that connection that people have, and also with Streets of Rage, because those two sort of, came out around the same time, and they were direct competitors. Maybe not so much with the older ones, though. And I feel like beat 'em ups and fighting games they're like cousins that actually don't necessarily get along, because I played beat 'em ups because I didn't like fighting games, because I wasn't good at them. So like I wasn't going to sit around and learn moves and stuff like that. So like, but on beat 'em up, I could just hit punch and kick, and I could play through the whole game. So,
totally, yeah.
So I don't know. They have an interesting connection to one another, but I don't know if there's a whole lot of overlap, because I think somebody who really appreciates fighting games and leans that way probably doesn't think so well of a game that only has 2 attacks.
I see then. They wanted to have their combos and special moves and ultra moves. Exactly.
Which, as the years went by, several games did sort of go that way. Like there are a couple beat 'em ups. I guess technically Streets of Rage 2, you do have input commands for like one move per person, I think. And
I suppose like as we enter like the PS2 generation, we sort of got like a rise of like 3D beat 'em ups that did rely more on combos and special attacks. Yeah, and were you ever a fan of 3D beat 'em ups?
Yeah, I think there's some really good ones. One of my favorite is Fighting Force. I think it's a really well done game, and I think it's Die Hard Arcade is the name of it. It's got a Dynamite something. Dynamite Cop is the Japanese version of it, but it's I don't understand how they did it story-wise, or why, or what it has to do with the other, but you're John McClane and you're fighting in the Nakatomi building, and they're robots, and there's all kinds of crazy shit. But yeah, it's a really good one.
I see.
There's a couple other good ones for PS2. There's Urban Reign. That was one name, and ironically, Namco and Capcom both released PS2 era beat 'em ups. Like, I think just to like complement their fighting games, because they were really popular on that too. Forgot that Capcom one, but yeah, there's a ton of good ones.
And I think like in the modern era, the modern era of games, I feel like Platinum Games and their sort of like resume is sort of like maybe the modern style of beat 'em ups. I'm talking about games like Bayonetta, kind of Metal Gear Rising, Transformers Devastation. I feel like where those are the more like combo heavy and also very visually flashy games as well.
Yeah, they're Mad World, that I would definitely consider that
Mad World, totally. Yeah. What do you think about like the Batman Arkham games? Do those count as beat 'em up, or like just beat 'em up? It's like the beat 'em up section of a bigger game.
Technically, I don't think I would, because I think that there's a fighting system that was developed for the game. and specifically like for the game and how Batman fights and everything. And I think there's just too much other stuff for me to consider that a beat 'em up.
Would you consider
I
like
think
there's elements of a beat 'em up in there?
I think, I mean, to a degree, I think.
Because I noticed like
I would lean more towards Arkham Asylum being that way, but once you start to get into the more open cityscape, then I think the open world genre sort of like rears its head more. Because the first one's so linear,
right?
As far as I'm concerned, like compared to the other games, that for me that's an important distinction for a beat 'em up, is it being very linear.
I see then, and I just wanted to bring that up because it's almost like the similar premise of a person who's in a constricted, almost like claustrophobic environment as they're getting like they take on a whole bunch of dudes trying to take them on at the same time. And
yeah,
I guess like after Arkham Asylum came out, a lot of other games were trying to copy that style for a while. And even now you can still see hints of that. Like maybe in the new Spider-Man game, you can see sort of like this sort of stealth mechanic idea and like blocking, parrying. Although I also seen a lot of people also try to copy the Platinum game style of fighting of beat 'em up games, the whole counter fighting multi-combo system. Yeah, so yeah, it is very interesting to see like this evolution. But I'm assuming for Final Street, the comic, you're mainly sticking to like the retro age of beat 'em ups.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that we're really going to directly reference or take a lot of inspiration from probably won't have traveled far from the 16-bit era, just because that's such the heaviest concentration of those games. That's when like, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a beat 'em up game that was either some urban, style one or some licensed property, just, being copy and pasted onto the beat 'em up form, with like the Turtles games and Batman, and basically everybody had a beat 'em up at one point.
Right. I think what was it? Batman Returns had a beat 'em up.
Yeah, it was the single player only, which was a bummer, but it was really good though.
Imagine you get like a player 2 as like Catwoman or something, or
yeah,
dude. Imagine playing as like Danny DeVito Penguin. Let's see, and I previously mentioned fighting games and like whether or not there's any overlap between the two, because I was wondering if there were any ever plans to like reference certain fighting games within Final Street.
I think as there is a bit of some Street Fighter, like I said, it's hard not to take a little bit from it because of how Final Fight did so well in spinning out of Street Fighter. So they have such similar blood that I do think it makes for an interesting opportunity there. Me and Brian have a really cool idea that we want to explore with the second series with Volume 2, should we ever get that far. And there is definitely a direct character inspiration from one main character from the Street Fighter series that we're going to explore. So
If I remember correctly, wasn't Final Fight like originally envisioned to be a Street Fighter game, but because it was so different, they decided to give it its own title?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how that goes. That it was supposed to be, and then just didn't work out for whatever reason. So.
Right. Yeah, and like you mentioned later down the line, many several Final Fight characters would eventually make appearances in like the future Street Fighter games and like Marvel vs. Capcom games. Yeah,
which is so interesting to me. Like I don't know how that happened, but it's now that they're there, it's just like they always were or something.
Yeah, it's like it's like at this point the two universes just go hand in hand with each other.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And let's see. I did notice that your idea was to translate these kind of games into a comic book medium, and in a way, it kind of reminds me of Christopher Martinez's idea of taking like old like 50s, 60s Godzilla style B movies and translate that into a comic book. And I've noticed here it's like you have like opening game credits, you have at some certain points you see the life bars of the main protagonists. My favorite parts where it's like you kind of pull the camera back and you see this sort of composition that looks just like a screenshot out of those arcade games.
Yeah.
Do you sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you plan on continuing this pseudo game style for each issue?
I think so, and it's interesting. Like we were sort of, as we were doing the series, we kind of went back and forth on how much we really wanted to embrace that or lean into it, because we didn't want to rip people out of the story if suddenly the life bars appeared. And but as we had a few people read it, we just got a couple suggestions and decided that we were actually going to just go ahead and lean into it, and that like if people really liked the premise in the first place, then they really wouldn't mind certain things showing up that did remind them exactly of the video games. So
probably one of my favorites was like the health pickup.
Yeah, and and that was one of the hardest ones to sort of translate to it, because you can't really like to have
life.
her, and to have your her life bar adjust like in that panel or something, like you just really couldn't pull that off in any real successful way. So
I guess you could put like a plus, like HP plus 20 or something, but then I guess that could be considered distracting.
Well, see, and that was really kind of the test. Like we didn't really know how it was going to come off and if it was going to be too much or too little. So I mean, so far we've gotten nothing but positive feedback about those scenes. That there's just enough there to remind you, but it's not so oversaturated with actual video game nostalgia that you're just
Oh, you know what Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I think we hit a good balance, and I think we're going to try to maintain that through it. It might not be repeats of the same stuff we're doing now. We might try to like pull in some more, so it's not so repetitive, I think. Okay,
yeah. So try to bring out some new tricks for each issue, then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and I just remembered something. I remember it was Scott Pilgrim versus the World that did a similar thing, where it's like trying to take the video game aesthetic and bring that to live action.
Right.
Yeah, to the point where it's like anytime like a boss gets killed, they just like burst into a shower of coins.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what was it? So with the scores that these characters have, as well as their health bars, would that like go into like the next issue / stage?
Yeah, I think we're gonna try to keep it. I mean, the numbers are completely arbitrary. But I think now that it's in print and now that they're there, like, yeah, we kind of do have to keep a running score going on. So,
and would they keep the same life bars, or would their life bars just regain like the moment they enter a new stage?
I think so. In the very beginning of issue 2, we sort of have another sort of power up moment. So,
okay.
So it is going to carry over. But in the next couple issues, we'll sort of have to see, because the thing about the series, interestingly enough, is that as we go through the issues, we start to basically, the first issue has to be everything that a first level of a beat 'em up game is, right? Like we have to sell you on it so hard,
right?
And so that's what the first issue is. So there's not a whole lot of room for a lot of other story, a lot of other character moments, or a lot of development. Yeah. So, but as we go on, like then we start to sort of tell our own story, and the characters start to shine out a little more. So we're going to have a little less moments to be able to incorporate, like the homages and the beat 'em up stuff. So,
right,
because basically at some point starts to become like the actual story that we were wanting to tell in the first place. So
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I took a similar approach with my comic, where it's like the first issue is there to just introduce you to this world and get you right into the middle of the action to get your attention as fast as possible. And then in later issues, like, you can start to slow down and start to focus on the character. So I totally understand where you're getting at with your approach to the storytelling there.
yeah.
And at any point, because I mentioned you had mentioned before, like, you were going for that like late '80s, early '90s arcade aesthetic. Was the movie Kung Fury ever an inspiration for you?
No, I don't think so. Not directly. I mean, visually maybe, but I think the level of absurdity in Kung Fury is probably more than I was aiming for with ours.
Okay.
Ours is a little more grounded, I think, as far as the story is concerned.
Okay, I get that then, and I suppose it's like like Kung Fury is certainly not the first, nor will it be the last to do the sort of '80s throwback style of media. I just brought it up because it's like probably been one of the most prominent 80s throwback projects, but feel free to disagree.
No, I mean, it's great. I love it. I love it in its own right. I think they're getting ready to make a sequel too.
Yeah. Oh, did you ever try out that Kung Fury mobile game that's in the style of a beat 'em up?
Oh no, I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they still have it on, but it's free. You can download it, and it's one of those games where it's like you simply tap the right and left side of the screen. So like if there's an enemy on the right side, tap the right side and he punches them. There's a stronger enemy on the left side, tap the left side twice to punch him. So it's like you're constantly balancing whether or not to punch right or punch left, as like harder and more stronger enemies show up on screen at the same time.
That's cool. It makes me think of Kung Fu on NES.
Oh, nice. So let's see. Okay, so we about like roughly a year ago or so, you had a Kickstarter for this for Final Street #1. And was this? I've obviously you worked with Kickstarter in the past before. Have you done Kickstarter for all of your comic projects?
I have done a Kickstarter for all of my projects that I am the
head
creator of. Okay. Yeah, like where the idea started with me.
Okay.
Although the Final Street is the only one that I've done it with a co-creator, because my other ones were all for the Northern Steel series, and that's something that I own completely myself.
Okay. And okay, and so what led to you to use Kickstarter as your main? What led you to go for crowdfunding to get your comic made?
I think mostly early on it was because I had no realistic way of being able to pay to produce my own comic. You know, I didn't have a stable job or anything like that, or at least a stable enough job to where I had, extra money in my pocket to put towards a full feature comic book.
Right.
So, to realize that Kickstarter was a way to be able to do that, in the course of 30 days, raise enough money to, make the comic over the next couple months. And just decided that was pretty much the way that if I was going to be able to make a comic, that was going to have to be the way that I could do it.
Okay, then. Yeah, I can definitely see how it would be much easier and less of a financial strain for crowdfunding. And
a lot of it, too, is that, when you do get with an artist and you're working with somebody on something and you're paying them out of pocket, for whatever reason, if they're kind enough to be able to wait for you and be cool with working on a couple pages, a month or something like that, that's awesome. But you also got to think that, it's going to take you a year to pump out a single issue, and that's a lot of time. And it can be a lot of time between issues too. And you sort of run the risk of, you spend all this time making this issue and then a year goes by. Those people that read that issue a year ago, you can't necessarily depend on them to want to care about it now, a year later, for the next one.
That's why that's definitely one of my concerns when it comes, because I've seen people like you, me, and our fellow indie comic friends have all worked on projects slowly, bit by bit, issue at a time, and meanwhile, there's like tons of other indie series are coming out. Meanwhile, it just makes me wonder how the heck Marvel and DC are able to pump out stuff on a monthly basis, or how the Japanese industry can pump out manga chapters on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
I mean, although I have heard that a lot of manga artists, they are often go through so much crunch time that they have virtually no free time whatsoever.
Yeah, I've heard some pretty rough stories about manga artists.
Yeah. Apparently, one manga artist, what was it? I think it was the guy behind Hunter x Hunter or Naruto. He couldn't, he had to delay his own honeymoon years later after his series was actually done. I'm like, God damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you mentioned you were concerned about people being, concerned about people still being interested in your stories, even if it takes another year. And that's why I'm more than happy to know that the Kickstarter for Final Street #2 just recently got funded completely. So it's that's a very good sign that people are still on board for your comic.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we're pretty shocked. We got almost halfway funded in the first day, which was awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just showed us that, the work that we've been putting in to promote the series as well is just, the series itself is something that, people, when they can find it amidst the sea of other comics that are out there right now, they really dig it. So.
Totally. And we mentioned before how the beat 'em up genre is still alive, both in bigger game and AAA games, as well as definitely in the indie scene. And there's tons of retro throwback style art beat 'em up games out there. So there's still a love for just retro games in general, as well as this specific genre that I think this comic definitely appeals to a lot of people. And of course the artwork itself is very eye-catching enough to say, hey, this looks interesting, I want to have a piece of this. And what was I going to mention? Oh yeah, so when dealing with the first Kickstarter, what was it like putting all together all the rewards and perks for each of the backers?
My first one, which was the first Northern Steel campaign, it was difficult because it was just all me, and I had made a reward that was fairly difficult to actually make. I hadn't. Basically, I was selling a set of 3 prints, but I had them more or less framed and matted. And I had never really done that before, and I hadn't really priced it either. It was just something I wanted to do, so I just did it. And then actually making those, having to buy the heavier matte board paper and then using a scalpel to measure and cut out rounded corners and stuff, it turned out to be my nightmare for about a month while I made them all. So that was pretty interesting. But so far, I think basically as I've done each one, the thing that I've learned the most to do is to try to keep as many of your rewards as uniform as possible in regards to your packaging. Because if you can get away with just buying a bulk of mailers that will fit everything you could possibly, offer, that will save you a lot of money. So just like, I don't know, offering digital rewards wherever you can is always a good thing that I've learned. So that way, your investment is much lower. But you still get to create content for your backers.
Right.
So I haven't had too many problems.
Okay.
But it is like, that process of once you get your money, once you're funded, and then it gets in your bank account, and then you send all of that money out, and then just hope you get comics back and packages back and things in return, so that then you can turn around and send it all back out. The one thing I will say, the worst part about running a Kickstarter is having to take your totes full of packages, hundreds of packages, to the post office and stand in line and then watch everybody behind you hate you while you send all these packages.
You got like all these, like, I imagine that you're standing in line with like these boxes on top of boxes on top of boxes, and everyone's like, this guy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been my least favorite part of each Kickstarter that I've done, is having to go to the post office.
Yeah. What was it? When it came to the Kickstarters, have you ever done any sort of stretch goals where it's like, if we make this much more than our goal, then we'll add this extra thing on top of the thing we're promising?
Yeah, I've done a couple of those. For the first Final Street, we were able to raise enough money to put in a chiptune soundtrack, so that basically each issue comes with a QR code link to an original chiptune soundtrack that we hired a guy to do for us. Nice. He's a chiptune artist named Silvio, and he's a great dude, and he rocks out our tracks, and so we were able to make that a stretch goal. It was something that, it wouldn't make or break the comic if it was in there or not, but the fact that we were able to raise that money to be able to do it was awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. So you got some like background music to play as the characters are going through stage one.
Yeah, just to sort of, further evoke that feeling that you're walking through a beat 'em up world.
Nice. I've asked that question because I've, paid attention to a lot of Kickstarters, quite a number of Kickstarters over the years, and I've noticed that like stretch goals can, I found stretch goals to be somewhat like a double-edged sword, where it's like it's very tempting to offer more content to get more money, but at the same time, it's like if you make too many promises, you might not be able to handle all of those stretch goals at the same time. And it was that sort of thing that ended up like causing the downfall of like, are you familiar with that game Mighty Number 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how it's like it promises stretch goals upon stretch goals upon stretch goals, and that only caused that sort of like was like too much for like the developers to handle. It's like, wait, we have to make a game for like 9 consoles now?
Yeah, that the way that was handled kind of inadvertently wrecked that whole game's potential, I think.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. Of like, you have this guy who's leaving the big industry in the hopes of striking it out on his own, with his own indie company, and now his company is folded into another indie company, ironically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very good that you guys are, were able to handle the first Final Street Kickstarter without a hitch, and it seems like things are going just as smoothly, if not more so smoothly, than with number 2, with the Final Street number 2. And at this point, we're entering into our last week, so basically anything that we make, in this next week is all just stuff that we can put towards, anything extra that we might want to include. We are playing a little tighter to the collar on this one, though, because what we'd like to do is take whatever we can get extra to be able to put to the next issue. So that way we might not have to come to Kickstarter for the 3rd issue, and we could just go ahead and get
the next one under our belt, and then and come to Kickstarter one last time, more than likely for the 4th issue, but be able to offer the collected series at that point in time as well.
So how many issues is Volume 1 supposedly going to take place over?
So it's going to be 4 issues.
Okay.
Issues number 3 and 4, they might end up running a little longer than the first 2. Just kind of depends on what we need to do to finish the story, but we've definitely got it tied down to 4 issues, and we can tell the complete story with that.
Okay, interesting. And I think you mentioned earlier you were already planning out these like concepts for a potential 2nd and 3rd volume along the way.
Yeah, we have basically what would amount to a trilogy planned. We know sort of what would take place in each of the different games or series. So, lots of fun brainstorming stuff that we kind of just inadvertently came across while we were planning these issues. So.
Okay. And at any point, will the final level be set in space?
Gosh, I hope not. You can't rule out anything, I suppose.
It's like, Sully and Cooney are like chasing after Franklin, and eventually like the main boss just like gets on a rocket ship in the very last chapter. It's like, you can't catch me, girls. Yeah, I'm just kidding around, but yeah, it's just like I've seen video game plots just go right out the window and just like jump the shark big time on that.
Yeah.
It's like, you ever seen that game Narc? Where like you're shooting a bunch of like drug dealers.
Yeah, with the big skull head boss thing. Yeah, it's like on a tank.
Yeah. Like at the very end, you're just shooting like the mob boss, who's like just a dude in a wheelchair, but for some reason he explodes and turns into like a giant head on a tank. It's like, how did we get to this point?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm really liking where you're going with this, and if you want to stay like grounded in a sort of like this urban style environment, it's like, that's awesome, that's really cool. I don't want to intrude upon your creative integrity there.
Well, if they go to space, I'll have to give you a side credit for it.
Okay, and time travel. Well, the other question I had was, you worked in the past with SourcePoint on a couple of your projects, right?
I've worked with them with the Hank Steiner series, yeah.
Okay. And how did you come to work with Devil's Due Comics for Final Street?
So I guess, let's see, right before our Kickstarter for the first issue, Brian and I, we had about a seven page pitch ready, to sort of send out, and we ended up going to C2E2 together, and we made a couple of printouts and basically just visited potential publishers and dropped off our pitches. And one thing is we apparently we didn't know it at the time, but I guess that's not really how you do things anymore. Now publishers don't really want to be handed anything at a con, which I totally understand. And so pretty much all of our ash cans went in the trash can. Is what I'm assuming.
Yeah.
But Josh from Devil's Due, the CEO and one of the writers and basically creator of the whole place, I guess he'd saved it, and he was going through his box of stuff one day and found it, and he ended up sending us a message to say that he was interested in the series, and we kind of just hashed it out and figured out what that would look like, and ended up going ahead and signing with him as a publisher.
Okay, interesting. And how was it that you ended up with SourcePoint for Hank Steiner?
That was all on Tyler. At the time, he the co-creator on the book at that time, Sarah, his ex-wife,
Right.
they were in the process of trying to find it a home, and I think they knew Travis McIntyre, the CEO of SourcePoint Press, in some way, in some capacity. So they kind of got hooked up talking about it like that. So that's how that got accepted over there, and I was just kind of along for the ride as the writer. So
Okay then. And what was it like working with both SourcePoint and Devil's Due Comics? And it's like, is there any like distinction between the two in terms of like the experience of working with them?
I can't comment a lot on the SourcePoint because mostly I haven't
communicated with
really
them directly.
Yeah, like as far as like the printing is concerned, or like any decisions about that, was mostly handled with Tyler. But Devil's Due has been really good. They picked us up as well as another series by writer Pat Shand. It's called Little Girl, and it's a horror story. And we were kind of the first two books to sort of be debuted under their new approach to comics, which Josh sort of sums up as just them being more hands off as a publisher. So letting creators make more decisions, based on what they want to do.
Yeah.
So they're pretty much open to whatever we want and suggest, and they've always got good ideas about how to promote and things like that. So, and like, Brian and I, we talk directly with Josh, anytime we really need to, so he's really accessible and super friendly, and he's been in the industry for a decade plus now. So, he's seen about everything that there is to see in comics. So that's kind of a nice little well of advice to be able to go to.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming that Devil's Due Comics, they really have no issue with waiting a year, roughly a year for each issue to come in.
No, and we'll see if it becomes an issue. If it takes us another year for the next issue. I'm not sure. But I mean, there hasn't been any mention about that being dissatisfactory.
Okay.
Yet. So.
Yeah, because I've often asked like some of our friends, and I would often get some conflicting yeses and nos when it comes to most comic publishers, like either expecting you to have the whole series finished or not. So
right.
I guess it's more of like a case by case basis then.
Yeah.
Okay then.
Seems to be anyway.
Yeah. All right then. And the last question I have has been like, what has been like the overall reception to Final Street, and like especially when it came to you selling the comic and promoting it at like conventions in person or online?
So the best way that I can and I've said this I think after each show that I've had it at, is that Final Street is definitely a niche book. So, it automatically makes it harder to appeal to everyone. But the best thing about it is that when someone sees it, like I can see when they're walking along and then they see and look at the Final Street booth, I can tell before they get anywhere near it that they know exactly what it is. And that they're excited about it. Like that they looked and they saw the characters on the banner, they saw the name, and whatever else is on our table, because we have like retro game homage prints. So like there's the old Nintendo games with the Konami games that had the 3 gray bars.
Oh yeah.
All of their games had like that same look. So we've got a Final Street parody of one of those.
Oh, sweet.
And a couple other things like that. So as soon as some people see this, they they just, their eyes light up. They're like, oh, this is awesome. So like the people who get it, they love it, so that's been the reception that we've gotten so far.
And Any fan art yet of Sully and Kumi?
Yeah, actually, the first issue of the Kickstarter edition has a fan art gallery. We got several really awesome fan arts coming in, and then there's also a few others on our Instagram page right now that some of our good friends did.
It must be like a very nice feeling to see other people like wanting to do their take on your characters or your creation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially when like you had no idea that they were doing that.
Right. And the little 4-page gallery you have at the end of the comic, at least like the version that I've read, was that the fan art version, or was this like stuff that you officially commissioned from other people?
It's both.
Oh, okay. Because I see like one version from Brian himself.
Right.
Yeah, I see another one from John Fisher, a more stylized version. Another by Jesse Quay, I think. Yeah. And that's really cool. And I also had like the similar idea for my Draco Azul comic of having like also a mini gallery, just commissioning people and showing off their takes of the character.
Yeah, it's always cool to see, like you said earlier about how a character will fit into a different visual style. And, when someone pulls it off, it's really awesome.
Yeah, totally. And so, before we wrap things up, do you think you'll find yourself working on another project in the near future, or do you think Final Street would be the thing that you'll be sticking around with for a while?
That's a good question. I would like to say that I'm going to try to stay disciplined and stick with, the things that I've got going on right now, but I honestly can't guarantee that. Sometimes certain ideas just take hold and they won't leave you. So
right, certain things take priority.
Yeah.
And hey, Durantis #2 is finally coming out, so who knows if Durantis 3 might be right around the corner in your future.
Very true. Who knows? I haven't gotten a phone call yet about any more Durantis, but we will see. I mean, if it's going to happen and I get asked to, I'll definitely do it because it's a super fun book to write.
Absolutely, man. So, thank you very much, man, for coming by here and getting the chance to chat about your works. And, I wish you like the best of luck and success, all the best success for Final Street, Northern Steel, and everything else under the sun, under the Scott Schmidt umbrella.
Well, I appreciate it, man. It's always great hanging out and talking comics with you.
Absolutely, man. Same. The feeling is absolutely mutual. So, where can people find you, follow you, and your body of work?
The best place right now, I've sort of transitioned over to Twitter. So you can find me, Scott Schmidt at Pistol Whip Press, all one word. So that's basically I'm just there talking comics, talking retro gaming, just kind of everything that I do will pass under that account in some form.
Okay. And if they want to follow Final Street, where can they follow that?
So Final Street's going to be mostly on our Instagram page, which is just at Final Street. And we also do have our Facebook page linked to our Instagram. So if you only use Facebook, you can go to Final Street Comic on Facebook as well. And where can people who want to buy your comics, where can they find them? You can find Final Street is on Comixology right now, the first issue, and then the second issue will be out in August on Comixology. And if you wanted to get in on the Final Street Action Kickstarter right now, we do have 7 days left, so you could go ahead and get your copies of issues 1 and 2 through there. And then that's pretty much it for right now, because my Northern Steel series is currently undergoing a transition, so that I'll be rebranding it, and then currently everything is out of print. So
and I'm assuming like Durantis #2 will be right around the corner, hopefully very soon, with the lettering finally finished.
Yeah, that'll be out soon, and then going out to backers. And then I believe it will also be available in Comixology.
Right, and I think I may have heard Tyler mention thinking about like doing reprints of the first issue as well for people who haven't read it as well, but were interested from issue 2.
Right. Yeah.
And despite even though Durantis #2 has unfortunately gone through a bit of a few setbacks due to like certain personal issues and complications here and there, I'm very happy to know that the project you and Tyler worked on so hard on is also finally coming to fruition. And from what I've seen, it looks like to be like another fantastic collaboration between the two of you, and I can't wait to see that alongside Final Street in the months to come.
Yeah, same here, man. I can't wait to have them all out on my table together.
Totally. And so for physical prints of your comics, well, specifically Final Street, so I'm assuming the physical copies can be purchased through the Kickstarter and through convention appearances?
Yep, those would be the best ways. Although if you ever contact me on Twitter, I can always ship anything out to anybody and using PayPal and all that good stuff. So I'm always available for just one-on-one transactions as well.
Okay, but for the most part, it's like the best, most widely option is the digital Comixology version.
Yeah, if you just wanted to not have to interact with anyone and just wanted to read a comic, that's the best way to do it.
All right then. So once again, thank you very much, Scott, for coming on board, and much props to you, man. And like I said before, I wish for nothing but the best for you guys. So thank you, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for another episode of the Shuwatch podcast. I have been your host, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and you have been
Scott Schmidt.
And until next time, everybody, take care.